Number 1. There's an abandoned and boarded up World War II fort in the southern part of Belgium that we often sneak into with the scouts. Getting in there requires scaling a sheer wall where we've placed anchoring points for ropes and climbing gear next to a relatively busy road. So you're being super quiet, making sure no light is shown and cowering every time a car passes by so he doesn't spot you with his lights. The atmosphere is set. The moment you enter, it's like diving into water. Sound stops, and the entire place is at a constant 14 degrees Celsius, with a slight breeze passing through. The tunnel is barely large enough for me, slightly broader than the average person, to pass without turning my body sideways. The tunnel is just high enough to work up a decent gait while hunched over. If someone ahead of you blocks a passage for a moment, the breeze stops, and it feels like the entire tunnel network takes a breath. Because of the way the tunnels are constructed, they echo in such a way that your own footsteps seem to be coming from behind you. They also seem to take one more step than you do when you stop. Of course, we don't allow the guys and gals to take any source of light in there, so it's pretty scary overall. So I'm in there, posted at a side passage to ensure everyone takes the same path and doesn't get lost. I go in first, before any of the climbers arrive, so they don't know there are friendly faces in there to help them. I'm in there for a while, just waiting for the first to come by, when I see a dancing little light coming down the long hallway. I quietly settle back into my nook and wait for whoever was smart enough to hide some matches and take them away. The light quietly bobs closer, when I realize that there aren't any footsteps accompanying it. I poke my head around the corner just in time to see it disappear. I hear no footsteps still. I settle back and wait some more, when I realize that I do hear some scuffling. Very faint. Breathing noises, but still very faint. I become aware of a wet heat coming from right in front of me, with a faint smell of person, sweat, dirt. Suddenly I realize that there's someone there, right in front of me, inches from my face. The breathing stops suddenly. Whatever it is, it's aware of me as well. Whatever or whoever it is, we're both holding our breath, both acutely aware of each other. It takes ages. I'm sitting there, unable to move, speak, or breathe properly. The wet heat passes, and some minutes later, I become aware of very faint light coming from my right side, which soon dissipates and leaves. Sometime later still, I hear the familiar stomping of combat boots coming down the hallway from my left. I stop the person, tell them to keep following the passageway and take the first right they come to. Out of curiosity, I ask who went in first. No one. He went in first. Number 2. Okay, this is an interesting story. Fairly close to the house I grew up in sits an abandoned elementary school. It hadn't been in operation since 1967. In 2007, my band was looking for a location to take photos, and I let them know about the school, and everyone was intrigued. We planned a trip to scope out the place and see what it had to offer. I had never been in the school before. I'd only heard about it. None of us knew what to expect. When we got there, the place was overrun with ivy and wildlife. Since the front door was locked, we had to climb in through a back window that was broken. We all got inside and began to spread out to examine the area. Nothing really creepy, just an old building that had seen its fair share of squatters and garbage dumpers. There were about 6 classrooms altogether. Some were in better shape than others. One room had a 4-foot wide, 3-foot tall pile of old roller skates. We thought that was odd. There was an old nurse's station with a medicine cabinet that had very old ointment in it. Sure, there were a few cat skeletons and dead birds, but we weren't bothered by it. We even saw 2 feral kittens running around and trying to avoid us. We were pretty satisfied with the trip and were about to leave when we found a room that none of us had come across yet. It looked like another classroom, but this one had a small door inside, about half the size of a regular door. We opened it and were presented with stairs going down into a dark area. We had phones and flashlights, and we soon found out that it was the boiler room. Along with the standard stuff you'd find in a boiler room, there was a long corridor that seemed like it went on forever. At the end of it was nothing. Just a wall and nothing else. So we decided to leave since we saw what we came to see. Right as we left the boiler room, I saw a small box on top of a plastic barrel. I opened the box, and inside was an incredibly old Polaroid camera. I thought it was cool, and I hung on to it. I was so excited about the find that I didn't realize that I had left the door to the boiler room open. We closed up the doors to the school to make it look like we didn't disturb anything. We got back into the van and were about to leave when I took the camera and pointed it at my guitarist, Pete, who was driving, and pretended to snap a picture. Only, it wasn't pretend. Not only did the flash go off, but an old Polaroid picture slowly slid out of the camera. We were shocked, to say the least. Amazed by what had just happened, we decided to take a picture of the front of the school from the van. Everything seemed fine, until the next day, when we went back to take the photos. We had brought a couple of other people with us this time. While we were giving them the tour, we decided to show them the boiler room. When we arrived at the front of the small door, we were presented with a horrible sight. The 2 kittens, who were alive and well the day before, were dead. Right in front of the door. The door that I had left open. But not just dead. Rotting and crawling with maggots. The smell. I'll never get that sight out of my head. However, we didn't let that stop us. We proceeded to take our photos and did our thing. Then, we remembered the camera. We showed the new people the camera, and they were amazed that it still worked and that it still had working film. We showed them the photos we took with it. Everything was all right until we got to the photo of the school. We had closed up the school. I know we did. We had to, so that nobody would be suspicious and prevent us from visiting again. When we looked at the photo of the school again, the front door to the school was open. Wide open. We just looked at the picture with our mouths open. I couldn't believe it. It seemed so unreal that I still have trouble believing it. Being the skeptic I am, I decided to recreate the photo by taking another picture with the camera from the same vantage point. This time, the doors were closed. I can't explain anything that happened. It creeps me out to this day to think about it. Number 3. Every once in a while, I'll go urban exploring with one of my friends. Usually, he just checks out abandoned houses and the odd factory or two. It can be a really cool experience for anyone who's into history or photography or asbestos inhalation. Today, though, he decided we're going to a local abandoned hospital. At night, with just the two of us, because it'll be more intense that way. And evidently, he's never seen a horror movie in his life. Despite my mild hesitations, we end up getting to this place as it's starting to get dark. We make our way in through a window that someone tore the boarding off of, and my friend gives his usual yell throughout the building, announcing his presence so we don't startle anyone else who might be inside by saying, "We're not the cops, we're just looking around and taking some pictures." By his logic, we're doing a courtesy to anyone else exploring the building who might panic if they heard us coming otherwise. By my logic, we're announcing our presence to every homeless person in the building who might want to steal a camera from two dumb kids. Despite my fears, nothing bad happens. We make it through the building, going through multiple floors and checking out the roof last. We get a ton of cool pictures and take a look at some of the creepy-ass old bathtubs and tables they left in the place. There's some really cool graffiti inside as well, mixed in with your usual shitty tags. The whole building is pitch black, except for a few spots where moonlight shines through, so we literally can only see whatever we happen to be pointing our phones at the time, or by using the flash on the camera. Even though I'm still worried about being murdered, I'm glad I went, and I'm less freaked out as we're making our way back to the window we came in through. We get back to the room, and I hop out the window first and have my buddy pass me the camera. As I take it from him, he starts climbing out the window, and a soft voice from what sounds like 10 feet or so inside the building says, "Wait." I look around my friend and can just barely see a silhouette standing in the doorway from where we entered the room. Now, I'm not proud of what happened next, but in that moment, the force with which my butthole puckered propelled me away from that building with enough forward momentum to last until I was at the edge of the property back towards the road. My friend followed after me quickly, more so to laugh at me than out of fear. He didn't seem to be too worried about it, though he agreed we definitely weren't going back. I know this isn't the most exciting story, but what terrified me at the time was that I was 100% sure we were alone in that building. It was dead silent aside from us. The fact that the man waited until right as we were leaving horrified me, as it made me realize they could have been watching and following us throughout that entire building, just listening to us talk, watching us take pictures, just following us. Needless to say, I don't do too much urban exploring anymore. At least, not at night, in old spooky buildings constructed prior to World War I. Number 4. Although it's technically not urban exploring, as a former electrician, I think I can still share one moment from a job I had to do about 13 years ago. Me and my job partner were called out to a larger restoration job that was being done to an older house from the early 1900s. The house was, until this point, a family-owned house which had 2 owners since it was built. And the last owner was an old lady who had passed away there whilst being the last person in her family line. Sad story on its own. And nobody could take over the house. So, the house got auctioned to a younger couple that bought it for an insane amount of money due to how large the house was. But it was now time to get the old house up to modern standards, which included a completely new installation from scratch, as the old cables around the house were the type of cables that were insulated with black cotton and fastened with handcrafted wooden clamps. While working in the first floor was quite easy, as the entire installation process was made to fit inside the new well frames that the carpenters were setting up, we eventually had to move on to the second floor and prepare for setting up a new intake from which the attic would then pass down to the new main fuse box on the second floor. We opened the hatch to the attic, and while using the flashlight to look up there, we could surely see that the attic was very cramped. So, the smallest of us would have to go up there to fix everything to get the intake cable settled while removing the old one. As you might guess, I was the smallest of us and had to do that shitty job of going up where nobody probably had been for many, many years. So I decided to grab a lunch break and mentally prepare myself for what I expected to become a pretty shit job. After eating, I grabbed my flashlight and tool belt and started climbing up the stairs. And while climbing upwards, I noticed that the smell, that we thought was pretty much old people smell after they die, was getting increasingly stronger. But I had to continue. So I got to the top and crawled myself onto something stable when I got up, while noticing the smell up there was pretty damn bad. So I grabbed my flashlight to look around and get somewhat oriented about where to crawl. Looking forward, it seemed like a pretty straightforward route towards the intake point that I could see in the distance, but out of curiosity, I wondered if there was anything up there, so I looked to my right, only to light up 5 carcasses of what once was the old lady's cats that probably had died. One of them was more or less intact, whilst being visibly partly eaten by various insects, or whatever eats such stuff, while 2 of them were more or less just rotten dried skin and bones. At that moment, I absolutely regretted my decision to eat lunch, as the sight of this, along with the realization about what I had smelled all along, being these dead cats, I immediately threw up on the spot before very swiftly noping the fuck out of there. After some talk back and forth, we came to the possibility that the old lady had been throwing her cats up there when they died, one by one. But we'll never know for sure since the lady had died. The new owners had no idea about this when buying the house, but our company ended up denying to continue the work until the attic had been cleaned appropriately. This apparently took them about a month to complete. I guess there aren't many companies who want to deal with that kind of nasty stuff, but my partner at work ended up finishing the work on the attic afterwards, as he felt kind of bad for me. In the end, I decided to not continue being an electrician anymore, as this was not work I really enjoyed doing, especially not after that event. Number 5. I'm an avid urban explorer and don't usually come across anything out of the ordinary, since in my hometown, everything that was being discovered was mostly by me and my friends. There was one time, though. While attempting to find the Burrow of the Beast, which is apparently an underground tunnel system that was suspected to be around the area where a child was kidnapped named Michael Dunahee. His disappearance was huge for Canada back when it happened. Anyways, we eventually narrowed down the entrance to a 3-block radius and searched for a few hours before finding it, just after sundown. We managed to get inside and put the manhole cover over top before anyone saw. The tunnel was just big enough to walk in, and skinny enough that my hands were pressed up against the walls and my ears. We had one friend stay up top, and me and my buddy Tom headed onwards for some time. We had been walking for almost an hour in ankle-deep water. It had rained that day, and we eventually came to a left turn that led us into a larger open area, which then led to a fucking normal-looking household staircase. And we were about 50 feet underground by then, I'd say. Now, this staircase went so far down that we couldn't see the end. We walked for a good minute before Tom said he felt weird, as did I. There was just this weird vibe, knowing that no one had gone this far before. We got a photo of this staircase, which I'll try to find to post in this, but as we walked up the staircase, all the water stopped flowing and the wind stopped. It was as if someone or something was blocking the tunnel. We didn't really know what to do, so we just kept walking. Eventually, we made it back out, and according to our time, we had been down there for just over 2 hours. Still to date, haven't gone back to continue down the stairs. Number 6. A week ago, I moved from Okinawa, Japan, back to California. I was there due to both my parents being Marines, and we were just stationed there for 4 years. Ghosts and spirits are common beliefs in Japan, so things such as temples and shrines are everywhere. Lots of lands are sacred as well. But I chose to go to Aokigahara Forest one last time before we left. Stupidly enough, I went by myself, because if you've ever visited or lived in Japan, it's one of the safest places ever. Also, my friend Julie from Shatan High School had hung herself there, so I wanted to pay my respects and leave a few gifts for her. Though, as I went to the forest, it was night, and I remembered setting up my tent and finding the spot where my friend had passed. Before I was getting into my tent, I heard a couple of noises, but wasn't scared as I already expected there to be several animals, and my mind was probably playing tricks on me. Though I stayed up a few minutes later and heard whispering and a branch crack behind me. I turned on my flashlight and didn't see an animal. I had a small military knife my dad gave me and trained me with, so I grabbed it and went to go look in that area 5 feet behind me. When I got to where I heard the noise, I heard someone scream in the distance. I was going to run back to my tent to call the cops and tell them that someone might be in danger, as I didn't want to go there and put myself in danger and not being able to help someone. But as soon as I started opening my tent, I remember getting hit in the back of the head, and everything was blurry until I passed out. I woke up and I was in front of the tent. I didn't remember what had happened at that time, but I thought I just fell on the rock next to me since it had blood that was flowing from my head on it. But there were a ton of lit lanterns surrounding me, and when I fully gained consciousness, I noticed that my hands were bound with 2 zip ties. Though I was aware, my vision was still blurry, so I was trying to get my vision back to normal and didn't even notice the person walk up next to me. I only realized it when he said, "He's awake," in messy English. I kind of yelped instead of screamed, but I was still terrified. I said aloud that he spoke English, but he didn't reply. He just yelled. Over and over again until I heard several other screams. It was when I heard a woman scream that I remembered that was the last thing I heard before I woke up like this. I didn't know how long I was out, and I was scared that I'd been violated or cut, but everything was normal at that point. After what had seemed like an hour of screaming every so often, a group of people emerged in Japanese spirit masks. The only one unmasked was the middle-aged man that I heard spoke English. I knew that I was in more danger, but during that entire time I was trying to find my knife. I found it but couldn't reach it. It was next to the man who was disassembling my tent. The people who had just arrived all came up to me and touched my face and hair. Thankfully never my body. At least, until the original man came up to me and quickly cut my arm. I think I was so scared I didn't even feel it until he passed it around, and all 5 other people made their mark, each mark on a different part of my body. But I didn't cry or scream. I closed my eyes, enduring the pain while trying to figure out how to get my knife. After they were done cutting me, I was picked up under my shoulders and dragged to one of the trees. I was closer to my knife and able to drag it with my foot while they finished packing up my stuff for some unknown reason. I was able to get a hold of my knife, but I knew I couldn't cut the zip ties until they were all looking away. When they were, I started cutting them and was at last able to free my hands. What I saw next was something I can't forget. The only woman in the group was suddenly hit by one of the others. She was arguing with him, but I couldn't understand. I only know simple Japanese, and I'm kind of glad that's all I knew. I don't know why, but I think she didn't want to be involved because I had just seen her carrying a man that didn't even look over 2 days dead, and she just dropped him right in front of me. When she did that, she grabbed the man's hand and started crying. She looked at me, but didn't say anything, nor did I want her to. I wasn't scared of the body. I've seen worse due to my parents' job. But it was what they had done to him, and were still doing to him, that got me worried. I freed my hands, but there were still 6 people. I knew my chances weren't likely, but I didn't care. I'm not afraid of death. I never have been, but I knew I wouldn't be able to move on in the afterlife, if there even is one, if I didn't even attempt to live. I was about to run, but the man came up to me. He asked me my name, and I didn't answer, so he punched me. He screamed the word name in my face again, and I still refused. He ended up putting his knife to my neck and spat out the word one last time. I said my name in Japanese, and he repeated it over and over again. It creeped me out, but I was still determined to get out no matter the circumstance. The woman said, "Here," in Japanese. That I recognized. He yelled at her and she bowed her head saying no. She once again got slapped. And I almost said something, but I knew that'd make it worse for both of us. She was crying but walked up to me anyways. I realized why she didn't want to come near me. She was told to put a noose around my neck. I cursed at myself, saying in my head that I should have ran earlier, but I still had a slight chance. The man speaking terrible English walked up to me and squeezed my face. "Jump," he said. I was dumbfounded. All these people wanted me to kill myself in front of them. All I was thinking was, do they get off on this? Or what about all these people that have died here, and their friends and family said they weren't suicidal and just came to pay respects or visit? Is that what happened to them? I refused to do so, so I put the knife against my throat again. This time he dug it in, and I could feel blood dripping onto my shirt. I yelled no in Japanese and could tell that he got really mad as he grabbed a smaller-looking knife and stabbed it into my thigh. I almost fell off the small rock that was holding me up. I knew I wouldn't be able to do anything if he hurt me again, so I took my chance. I moved my arms and I cut the hand that was gripping my face. He screamed, and I got the noose off my neck and ran. It was dark and I had no flashlight. I knew I was at least half a mile away from the parking lot where there were typically police patrolling around. I literally ran for my life. If I hadn't been here before and memorized paths, then I would have gotten lost immediately. I saw the parking lot after like 10 minutes of sprinting, but I was tackled. I still had the small dagger knife thing in my leg. I didn't pull it out before in case it punctured something, but I figured if I was going to go out, I was going to take whoever this man was with me. So I pulled it out. I almost didn't feel it due to the adrenaline. Before I was able to get this man, he did get me in the side of my stomach as he cursed at me, but I returned it. I know it didn't kill him though, because I knew what I was doing in terms of wielding a weapon. He started crying, and so I strugglingly pushed past this easily 200-pound man. I wasn't able to sprint anymore, but I forced myself to limp the last few minutes of the parking lot. There weren't any cops around, but I knew there was a street full of people nearby. So I left and waited in a crowd of people. but I didn't let anyone know I was injured because I didn't want them to find me. But I was losing blood, and knew I'd have to let someone know if it got too bad. Thankfully, 2 cops came around and I ran in front of their car. They didn't know what was going on until a bystander who spoke English translated for me and went with me to the hospital himself. The cops went to go look for them and found the area I was in as I put it on a map I had for them. They found all the lights that were surrounding me earlier that night and my blood on the ground. They also found my knife with the blood on it from the man, but they couldn't identify him. I left the hospital after 3 days, but there was something that always stuck with me. I wasn't just in that forest for a night. I was there, unconscious, for 2 days, and I had an anesthetic drug in my system that should have made it impossible for me to escape. I'm sure my background helped, but that still wasn't the scariest part. They said if I hadn't been persistent enough to get me stabbed in the leg, I likely wouldn't have been aware enough to escape.